The chandeliers did not shine. They floated, suspended high above the ballroom of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. Their crystal arms held hundreds of small lights that shimmered like captured stars. The marble floor beneath them reflected every movement: silk dresses, polished shoes, spinning couples, turning the entire hall into a slow-moving painting made of gold and shadow. It was the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. New York's most influential people had gathered: investors, politicians, socialites, heirs to old fortunes, and creators of new ones. Waiters moved silently through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne. Soft music from the orchestra drifted like perfume across the room. In the middle of it all, unnoticed by most, sat Jasmine Williams. Her emerald dress was elegant but simple, draping gently over the chrome frame of her wheelchair. The color made her skin glow warmly under the chandelier light, yet most eyes never reached her face. They stopped at the chair, always the chair, and moved on. Jasmine had grown used to that. 3 years earlier she had been a dancer. Now she was someone people pretended not to see. She rested her fingers lightly against the stem of a water glass she hadn't touched. Around her the room pulsed with life. Deals were negotiated in quiet corners, flirtations sparked near the bar, laughter rose and fell like waves. Yet she felt strangely outside of it all, like she had been placed inside a photograph rather than reality. Her skill now was invisibility. Then a voice cut through her thoughts. "Move." It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to pierce the music. Jasmine looked up. Marcus Chin stood beside her table. He was tall, immaculately dressed, and surrounded by people who smiled too quickly at his jokes. His reputation preceded him everywhere: a ruthless investment banker who could build fortunes or erase them with equal ease. And right now, he was looking at her the way someone looked at a stain on a clean tablecloth. "You're in my seat," he said. Jasmine blinked in confusion. I'm sorry. The coordinator assigned me here." She gently lifted the name card in front of her. See, Marcus didn't even glance properly at it. He snatched it from her hand, crushed it once in his fist, and dropped it onto the table. "This area is for donors," he said coldly, "not charity cases." The words hit harder than shouting. Several conversations nearby faded. People didn't intervene. They watched. Jasmine felt heat creep into her cheeks. "I can move if there's been a mistake." She reached for the wheel to turn her chair. Marcus stepped forward, blocking her path. "No, you don't understand." His voice grew louder. "People like you make others uncomfortable. This isn't a hospital ward." A few of his companions laughed quietly. Jasmine's hands tightened against the armrests. She hated that her voice trembled when she spoke. "I just came to support the hospital. They helped me after." "The accident," he interrupted with a smirk. "Touching story. Did you donate, or are you here for sympathy and free dinner?" More laughter. Her throat tightened. She had faced pity before, even cruelty disguised as kindness, but never this, deliberate humiliation performed like entertainment. "Please," she whispered. "I don't want trouble." The ballroom felt colder. Nobody stepped forward, because this was Marcus Chun, a man who controlled careers in the room. Then another voice spoke. "Quiet. Calm. Finish your sentence." Marcus turned. A man stood just behind him. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, no tie, hands relaxed at his sides. His expression wasn't angry, which somehow made it worse. His presence carried weight, like a still ocean before a storm. Park Young. Those who recognized him went silent immediately. Officially, he was the CEO of an import-export corporation. Unofficially, and more truthfully, his family controlled a vast portion of the Korean underground operations on the East Coast. Marcus's confidence vanished. "Mr. Park, I didn't realize you were here." Jung didn't look at him. He looked at Jasmine, and in a single moment his face changed, not soft, but gentle in a way that felt deliberate. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, startled. "I'm fine. You don't need to." "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." Then he finally faced Marcus. "I believe," Jung said calmly, "you owe her an apology." Marcus laughed nervously. "This is unnecessary. Just seeding confusion." Jung stepped closer. Only Marcus could hear the next words. Or we can discuss the Nakamura offshore accounts you concealed. Marcus's face drained of color. The entire ballroom held its breath. Apologize, Jung said. The silence stretched. Marcus turned slowly toward Jasmine, his jaw clenched tight enough to tremble. I apologize. Jung didn't move. That was not an apology. The humiliation deepened. Marcus swallowed then, to the shock of everyone watching, lowered himself onto one knee before her. Miss Williams, I behaved cruelly. You deserve respect. I was wrong. Jasmine stared, stunned. The apology wasn't sincere, but it didn't matter. The power balance had shifted completely. Thank you, she said softly. Jung spoke again. You and your associates may leave. No argument followed. Marcus and his group exited quickly under hundreds of watching eyes. The ballroom slowly breathed again. Jung pulled out a chair beside Jasmine and sat. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You experienced that. She studied him. The man who terrified a powerful banker, yet spoke to her like she mattered. Why did you help me? She asked. He considered. Because I know what it is to be judged before being known. She waited. My grandmother spent 15 years in a wheelchair, he added. She built everything my family has. Anyone who spoke to her that way learned regret. Jasmine felt the tightness in her chest ease for the first time that night. She sounds incredible. She was. A waiter approached with shaking hands. Champagne was poured. Jung lifted his glass slightly, to refusing to disappear. Jasmine hesitated, then clinked it. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. Music began again, a slow waltz. Couples moved onto the floor. She watched them automatically, the old ache stirring inside her, muscle memory of a life that no longer existed. Would you like to dance? Jung asked. She smiled sadly. I can't. He stood. You can. Just not the way they do. Before she could protest, he gently wheeled her onto the dance floor. Gasps followed them. In the center, he knelt to her level. We make our own version, he said. He guided her hands through the air while moving the chair in soft arcs, syncing with the music. It wasn't traditional dancing, but it was beautiful. And Jasmine laughed. Actually laughed. People stopped to watch, not out of pity, but admiration. When the song ended, applause erupted. Real applause. Tears filled her eyes, different tears. Not humiliation, relief, hope. The applause did not end quickly. It lingered, scattered at first, then gathering strength as more people realized what they had witnessed wasn't charity or spectacle, but something human, something rare in rooms built for reputation. Jasmine felt heat behind her eyes as Jung guided her wheelchair back toward their table. The orchestra resumed softer background music, yet the atmosphere of the ballroom had changed. Conversations were quieter now. People glanced at her not with pity, but curiosity, even respect. It felt unfamiliar, almost frightening. She had spent 3 years shrinking herself to avoid attention. Now attention followed her everywhere she looked. Breathe, Jung said gently, noticing her shoulders tense. She exhaled slowly. I'm not used to being seen, she admitted. He poured her a small amount of champagne. Most people spend their lives trying to be seen. Few realize how heavy it can feel. She gave a small laugh. Tonight I experienced both sides within 15 minutes. For the first time, a faint smile touched his face. A woman approached, elegant, older, wearing diamonds subtle enough to be old money. That dance, she said softly, was the most honest moment I've witnessed in this room in years. Jasmine flushed slightly. Thank you. The woman nodded respectfully to Jung, not fearfully, but knowingly, and left without lingering. Others followed briefly after, offering polite compliments before returning to their circles. No one mentioned Marcus Chen, but everyone was thinking about him. Jasmine leaned closer to Jung. You embarrassed a powerful man tonight. He embarrassed himself, Jung replied calmly. You threatened him. I reminded him actions have consequences. She studied him carefully. His tone was flat, not proud. Not apologetic either. Simply factual. You do that often, she asked. Only when necessary. Silence stretched comfortably for a moment. Then she asked the question she had been avoiding. Is it true what they say about you? He tilted his head slightly. You'll need to be more specific. There are many stories. The criminal ones. A pause. He didn't deny it. Some stories are exaggerated, he said. Some are accurate. Her heart beat faster, not from fear exactly, but from the strange honesty in his voice. You're not worried telling me that? You asked. That's not an answer. It is, he said simply. Trust requires risk. She looked down at her hands resting in her lap. I don't think anyone's ever trusted me with something dangerous before. Jung leaned back in his chair. People trust those who understand fragility, he said. You understand it more than most. The orchestra shifted into a softer melody. Candles flickered lower as waiters replaced plates and refreshed drinks. What did you do before? He asked. Before the accident. Jasmine hesitated. I danced. What kind? Ballet. His eyes focused fully now. I was with the American Ballet Theater, she added quietly. The words still felt heavy leaving her mouth, like speaking about someone who no longer existed. Were, he repeated carefully. She nodded. A drunk driver ignored a red light. My spine didn't forgive him. He didn't respond immediately, and she appreciated that. No automatic sympathy. No rehearsed comfort. Do you still dance? He asked finally. She smiled faintly. Only in memories. Memories can be rehearsals. She looked at him, confused. For something new, he clarified. She shook her head lightly. There isn't a new version of ballet for someone who can't feel their legs. Then you create one. The certainty in his tone made her chest tighten unexpectedly. You say that like it's simple. It isn't, he said. But difficulty and impossibility are different things. People confuse them often. For a moment she saw past the composed exterior, glimpsed a man who lived by rules carved through experience, not philosophy. What about you? She asked. Before business, before power. He studied the wine in his glass. I painted, he said. That surprised her. Painted. Landscapes mostly. Light and shadow fascinated me. He paused. I haven't touched a brush in 10 years. Why? Responsibility replaced time. There was no bitterness in his voice, only acceptance. She nodded slowly. We both lost our art. No, he corrected softly. We lost the form, not the instinct. Their eyes met, a quiet understanding forming without effort. The music swelled slightly as couples returned to the floor. Jasmine watched them again, but now without pain sharp enough to cut. Thank you, she said suddenly, for not pretending nothing happened earlier. Jung followed her gaze around the ballroom. Cruelty thrives in silence, he said, ignoring it as participation. She thought about all the times people had looked away from her discomfort, her exclusion, her humiliation, always politely. You're different from what I imagined, she admitted. What did you imagine? A dangerous man. He almost smiled again. You're not wrong. But you're not only that, she said. Another quiet pause passed between them, deeper than before. Eventually the gala began winding down. Some guests departed early. Others lingered near exits, exchanging business cards and promises. Jung stood beside her wheelchair. I'll make sure you get home safely. I already arranged a car, she replied. He shook his head slightly. Indulge me. Something in his tone made refusal feel unnecessary. Outside, the night air was crisp. City lights reflected across the hotel's polished stone entrance. A sleek black sedan waited at the curb. As his driver assisted her, she turned back toward Jung. Tonight would have been very different without you. He met her gaze steadily. Tonight reminded me why power matters, he said. Not to control rooms, to change moments. She smiled softly. I hope we meet again. We will, he replied, not hopeful but certain. The car door closed gently. As the vehicle pulled away, she watched him through the tinted glass, standing beneath the grand entrance lights, alone, still, and somehow less intimidating than before. For the first time since the accident, she didn't feel like a fragment of her former self. She felt like the beginning of a different one. 3 days passed before she heard from him. Not a formal invitation, not a business proposal, just a message. Coffee. Tomorrow afternoon. Somewhere quiet. No signature. Yet she knew immediately who it was from. Jasmine stared at the phone longer than necessary. She told herself it was curiosity, nothing more. After all, people didn't casually meet men whispered about in financial circles and police departments alike. And yet, she typed back a simple response. All right. The cafe was small, tucked between a bookstore and a tailor shop, the kind of place people only found if they already knew it existed. No press, no socialites, no cameras. Jung was already there when she arrived. He stood as she approached, not exaggerated politeness, just quiet respect. You found it easily, he said. You chose a place with wheelchair access, she replied. That helped. He nodded once, as though such consideration required no acknowledgement. They ordered coffee. No security hovered nearby, at least none visible, though she suspected that didn't mean they weren't present. For a few minutes they spoke about ordinary things, weather, traffic, the terrible music playing softly through the cafe speakers. Normal conversation, unexpectedly comforting. Finally he leaned forward slightly. Tell me about your work. She hesitated, not because she disliked talking about it, but because most people stopped listening halfway through. I design accessibility software, she said. Navigation systems for visually impaired users, adaptive input tools for limited mobility, communication aids, things like that. He didn't interrupt. Encouraged, she continued. After rehab, I realized independence isn't only about walking. Most people with disabilities lose freedom because systems aren't built for them. So I started fixing small parts of that. And it works, he asked. Yes. A small smile formed. Not perfectly, but sometimes I get emails from strangers saying they left home alone for the first time because of something I built. He watched her closely. That matters to you. It gives meaning to what happened. He nodded slowly, understanding more than she explained. Show me, he said. She blinked. Now. He slid his phone across the table. She laughed softly and opened one of her apps, demonstrating features, voice navigation, gesture adaptation, environmental alerts. 10 minutes passed unnoticed. When she finally looked up, she realized he hadn't checked his watch once. You actually listened, she said. You expected I wouldn't. Most don't. I don't invest in things I don't understand, he replied calmly. She paused. Invest. He leaned back. Your software could reach hospitals, transport systems, public infrastructure. It's not small. Her heart skipped. I don't want charity funding. I don't offer charity. Silence. Partnership, he clarified. You keep control. I provide resources. She searched his expression for hidden motives, found none she could read. Why? She asked quietly. He answered without hesitation. Because the world ignores problems that don't affect the powerful. I prefer changing the world so fewer people need defending. That answer lingered between them longer than either spoke. Over the following weeks, they met often, never publicly. Sometimes in the cafe, sometimes in his office overlooking the city skyline, once in an empty art gallery after hours. Each meeting blurred the line between business and conversation. He connected her with developers, distribution networks, medical advisors. Doors opened faster than she could process. Her project expanded into a company. Yet he never once tried to control it. You're giving me independence, she told him one evening. I'm removing obstacles, he corrected. She studied him thoughtfully. You don't like being thanked. I prefer results. She laughed. You're very strange. So I've been told. Months passed. Jasmine began speaking at conferences. Reluctantly at first, then confidently. The girl who once avoided attention now stood before audiences explaining accessibility design philosophy. He never attended publicly, but sometimes she would receive a short message afterward. Good speech. Or, slide 4, strong point. She always smiled when those messages came. One night after a presentation, she found him waiting outside the venue. You came? She asked, surprised. Briefly. Why leave early? He looked toward the street. Crowds notice patterns. Patterns create vulnerability. She understood. They walked slowly down the sidewalk together. You know, she said. People ask if I had a mentor. And I never know how to describe you. That's wise, he replied. They reached a quiet intersection. Traffic lights painted shifting colors across the pavement. She hesitated before speaking again. "You changed my life." He shook his head gently. "You rebuilt it. I only opened doors." She felt something unspoken pass between them. Not romance exactly. Not friendship alone. Something steadier. Trust. For the first time since the accident, the future didn't feel like recovery. It felt like forward motion, and neither of them yet realized. Someone else had been watching that motion carefully. Success attracts attention. Not always the kind you want. 6 months after the gala, Jasmine Software had moved beyond a personal project. Hospitals across the state implemented her navigation system. A transportation company signed a pilot program. A major tech blog published an article calling her work the first accessibility design that feels built for dignity, not accommodation. Her inbox overflowed daily. Interview requests, partnership offers, invitations, and among them, one message that felt different. No greeting, no signature. "You should be careful who stands behind you. Power is never free." She stared at the screen longer than she expected, then deleted it. Later that evening, she mentioned it casually while sitting across from Jung in his office. He didn't react immediately. "Show me," he said. She opened her trash folder. He read it once, then again. His expression hardened, not fear, but calculation. "Did you tell anyone else?" "No." "Good. Is it serious?" she asked carefully. "Probably not," he said, but his tone carried weight. Success creates resentment. She studied him. "You don't believe that." He met her eyes. "I believe coincidences are rare." Silence stretched. "You're not telling me everything," she said quietly. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. "My world doesn't disappear simply because I step away from parts of it," he said. "Some people dislike where my attention goes. And I'm now where it goes." "Yes." She felt a chill she hadn't expected. "Am I in danger?" He turned back. "No," he said firmly. "Not if I'm aware." She didn't miss the wording. 2 days later it happened. Not dramatic, not violent, but deliberate. She exited a rehabilitation center after a demonstration workshop when her wheelchair controls briefly malfunctioned, locking for 3 seconds before resetting. Technicians later blamed interference. Yet her personal programmer confirmed something unsettling. Someone had attempted remote access. The system blocked it. Barely. Jasmine called Jung that night. He arrived in under 15 minutes. No driver. No escort. That alone told her enough. "Explain," she said. He inspected the chair personally, speaking quietly on his phone in Korean. When he ended the call, his voice was calm but colder than she'd ever heard. "You're staying somewhere else tonight." Her stomach tightened. "Jung, this is no longer theoretical." "Who would do this?" He paused. "Someone testing whether you matter to me." The implications settled heavily between them. "Because of you," she said. "Yes." He didn't soften it. For the first time, she saw the cost of being connected to him. "Then I should step away," she said quietly. He looked at her, not angry, not surprised. "Do you want to?" She hesitated. "No." But fear answered before honesty could. "I don't want trouble following me forever." He nodded once. Understood. He turned toward the door, and the sudden distance in his voice hurt more than the danger had. "You're leaving?" she asked. "If you cut ties, my presence becomes the threat." She felt something collapse inside her chest. "That's not what I meant." He stopped. Silence. "You helped me build a life," she said. "I'm not walking away because it became complicated." He faced her again. "Complicated is survivable," he said quietly. "Violence is not." "Then protect me," she replied, surprising herself. The words hung between them. A choice, not dependence. Trust. For a moment he said nothing. Then finally, "I will." That night she stayed in a secured apartment belonging to his company. Guards remained discreetly out of sight. She didn't sleep much. For the first time, the man who defended her had brought danger with him. Yet strangely, she felt safer than before, because now she understood the truth. Kindness from powerful people always carries enemies, and someone had just declared her important enough to target. Morning arrived quietly through the tall glass windows of the secured apartment. Jasmine hadn't slept more than an hour. The city below moved normally, taxis, pedestrians, sunlight reflecting from steel buildings, completely unaware that somewhere within it, invisible lines had been drawn. She now stood on one side of them. Jung entered just after sunrise. No dramatic entrance. No visible guards. But she could tell immediately he hadn't slept either. "You found who did it," she said. It wasn't a question. He placed a cup of coffee near her and nodded once. "Yes." She waited. He didn't answer right away, as though deciding how much truth she deserved. Finally he spoke. "Marcus Chun." Her hands tightened around the cup. "The gala," she whispered. "Humiliation creates obsession," Jung said calmly. "He lost reputation that night. People like him don't forgive witnesses. So he targeted me to reach you." "Yes." She looked down at the coffee, its surface trembling slightly from her grip. "Will he stop?" "No." The honesty made her breathe slower instead of faster. "What happens now?" she asked. Jung walked toward the window. "I end it. Not revenge. Not anger. A conclusion." Later that afternoon, she insisted on going with him. He refused. She insisted again. "I won't hide while someone else decides my safety," she said. "My life stopped once already. I won't let fear stop it again." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Marcus Chen's office overlooked the financial district. High glass walls, polished wood, expensive silence. When they entered, Marcus stood immediately. The confidence he once wore was gone. What remained was tension stretched thin. "You shouldn't be here," Marcus said quietly. Jung didn't sit. "You targeted someone uninvolved." Marcus's eyes flickered to Jasmine. "She became involved when you chose her," he replied bitterly. "You humiliated me in front of people whose respect controls everything I built. You did that yourself." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I lost partners, clients, influence. You took years from me. And you tried to take her independence," Jung said calmly. "So now we settle balance." Marcus laughed once, hollow. "You think threats scare me now? I already lost." "Not threats," Jung interrupted. He placed a thin folder on the desk. Marcus opened it. His face drained of color exactly as it had at the gala. Evidence. Financial crimes. Forgery trails. Bribery records. Enough not just to end a career, but freedom. "You go to prison," Jung said, voice steady, "or you disappear from this city and never approach her or her work again." Marcus looked between them. For the first time, he noticed Jasmine fully, not as a symbol, not as weakness, but as the reason he had lost. "You're protecting her like she matters," he said quietly. Jung answered without hesitation. "She does." A long silence filled the office. Marcus closed the folder slowly. "I leave," he said. They walked out into the evening light. No celebration followed. No relief either, only stillness. Jasmine finally spoke as they reached the sidewalk. "You didn't destroy him." "I removed the conflict," Jung replied. She looked up at the skyline glowing gold. "For months I thought strength meant recovering from the accident," she said. "Then I thought it meant building something successful." She turned toward him. "But it's neither, is it?" He waited. "Strength," she continued softly, "is refusing to become cruel after being hurt." For the first time, emotion flickered clearly across his expression. "My grandmother said something similar," he said. "Power shows who you already are." They stood there, traffic moving around them, the city indifferent as always. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "you continue changing systems." "And you?" He looked toward the horizon. "I learn how to build instead of only defend." She smiled, not because danger had passed, but because the world felt wider again. Months later, her company expanded nationally. Accessibility standards began shifting. Public infrastructure adopted her frameworks. Her name appeared in places she never imagined. Yet the most important change wasn't public. She no longer made herself smaller in rooms. And he no longer lived entirely in shadows. They never labeled what they were. Not necessary. Some bonds weren't romance. Not friendship alone either. They were recognition. Two people once defined by what the world assumed about them, weakness and danger, choosing instead to define themselves by what they protected. And every so often, When music played in quiet places, they still danced, their own way.